Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining us tonight for another San Diego Union High School District College Application Webinar Series topic. We're excited you're here, and I know a few people are still trickling in. So while we're waiting for everyone to join, we just wanted you to know some information about our college application webinar series and some housekeeping items. So tonight, we're excited to talk about college admission testing. We're going over details related to how to determine if your child or if you need to take SATs, ACT testing for your college applications. The landscape of this has changed a lot over the past few years with changes from COVID to different legislation that's come out. And every year it seems to continue to change. So we thought it was definitely a topic that our community could benefit from learning more about. I know that when I used to work at one of our high schools, it was like a non-negotiable. Every student that was planning to go to college, a four-year college, would plan to take the SAT or the ACT. And that was a great thing and not a great thing at the same time. Some of our students are really, really strong test takers, and a test will absolutely show a college their ability and their strengths and dive deep into what they can or cannot do, or what how strong their testing was. Other students, it terrified them, and it was so stressful. And the fact of having to take a test that would be evaluated by a college was really difficult. So I am personally so happy to see that there's so many options now for our students. And the purpose of tonight is to just determine what's right for you and for your story and for your journey and for what you're planning to do after high school. So before we get into all of it, there's no right or wrong way. It really is dependent upon the student's individual needs and their individual path. So that's our plan for tonight. Our next session is actually this Thursday at 5 o'clock, though. So we're going back to the 5 o'clock time. And we are talking about thriving in transition. So a positive pathway to college success. And Megan Carraza, who's another one of our counselors on special assignment, will be presenting with Ed Devine, who is the senior admissions representative at Hampden-Sydney College. And they are going to be talking about how to support your student as they're navigating this journey of applying to college, getting accepted to college, and then attending college. And so I think it's a really helpful perspective that a lot of parents will benefit from. And so we hope you can join us on Thursday as well. And as you all know, if you joined our other recordings, these or our other webinars, they're all recorded, and we have them posted on our San Diego Union High School District College and Career webpage. We also have them posted on an events webpage that we have. Everything links to that events webpage where the links are. And we also send the information out through our high school counselors. They will share this, the recordings and presentations with all of the families that were either unable to come tonight. I know there's a Padre game, so that could have been a hard decision of which one to join. Or if you just want to rewatch it and kind of go through the information that you heard and maybe you want to share it again or listen to it one more time. So we hope you will access those recordings. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our panel, our presenters tonight. We're so thankful Destiny Martinez from University of Tennessee, Knoxville can join us. Destiny is one of our partners that she presented at our college night last year. She's the rep that visits all of our high schools for University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And she's just a great partner. So she's here tonight, and thank you, Destiny, for being here. And then we also have Vanessa Vargas Atempa. She's a counselor at Canyon Crest Academy. And she's going to kind of frame the conversation with me. And we're going to talk about what the options are for students and dive a little deeper into what the SAT or the ACT tests look like, and just considerations that our students could benefit from as they're determining what plan is right for them. And then myself, I'm Jamie Cambra, counselor and special assignment for San Diego Union High School District, and I support all the college and career readiness at all of our high schools and middle schools. And then Sarah O'Clishan, she is our TOSA, our teacher on special assignment of inclusion, intervention, and outreach. And she's like my co-partner in all of these webinars. And I'm so thankful she's here. So she's going to present on some slides tonight as well. So with that, I'm excited to pass it over to Vanessa. She's going to speak kind of on the overview of college admission testing. So thank you, Vanessa.
So thank you everyone for being here today. So we just want to cover some three big pictures kind of to consider when we're thinking about college admission tests. So the first big picture to consider, it's always best to double check college admission websites for their specific testing requirements. Since each school will have a different testing policy, especially for those private and out-of-state schools. So it's always great to double check on the specific college that the student is interested in applying to make sure that they have accurate information and know to guide kind of their decision on whether they should be taking the SAT or ACT. Many colleges and universities are still remaining test optional or test blind or test free for this admission cycle. But some schools have shifted either back or are continuing to require some admission test like the SAT or ACT. So again, just double checking, and individual colleges are still kind of making that determination if that's going to be continuing for future classes. So any underclassmen, always double checking is best. The other kind of big picture note to consider is for students that are interested in applying to UCs or CSUs, both systems are no longer considering SAT or ACT scores when making admissions decisions. So if students are solely looking at those systems, something to consider that they don't have to take those tests necessarily. We did hear that for the UCs and CSUs, since they've had this policy for the last 4 years, they have been tracking kind of the success of students that have been admitted under this policy, and they have noted that these students are still performing just as well as those that were accepted in prior years when the tests were required. So that's the reason why it's kind of reinforced their policy to not continue taking those test scores anymore. So again, this is just kind of a summary of the statements from the UCs and CSUs. And you'll kind of notice that they do mention that for students that do choose to submit those test scores as part of their application, they won't use it to determine the admissions decisions, but they may use it to either look at course placement after enrollment. And those are linked as well. So if you want to check those out on those websites as well. The last kind of big picture to consider is if students do decide to take the SAT or ACT, most four-year colleges will accept either. So students can kind of decide which test kind of plays to their strength. And we'll kind of delve a little bit deeper on what each test kind of looks like and the differences between the two, so students can kind of make those informed decisions on what tests will be better suited for them when when the time comes to take those tests. We recommend taking either of these exams by the end of junior year, but taking the test in fall of senior year is still acceptable, but just being mindful there usually is a last test date that colleges will accept for test scores. So just being mindful of that for students that are taking a test senior year. And fee waivers are available for tests if certain qualifications are met. So if there's some financial need, fee waivers are available for students and families. Okay, so in terms of planning and thinking of when students should be considering or practicing for these tests, so we'll kind of start off with junior year. So in our district, we actually do offer the PSAT during the month of October. So as it's kind of mentioned in the name, the PSAT is a practiced SAT to kind of help students gauge one, not only how that test will kind of look like, but also give students the idea of how they've done in the test, if there's certain areas that they did really well on, or what areas they can kind of prepare or study a little bit more for. So that opportunity is in fall of junior year. And then kind of, again, with that PSAT, that can help guide students as they practice and prep for the actual SAT and ACT. And during that fall, students may want to start looking at the spring test dates so they can get a test date that works for them in a location that hopefully is closer to their home. And then in springtime is actually when students want to make sure that they're taking the SAT or ACT if they need to take those tests. And then going into senior year for fall, if students either don't feel like they got the score they wanted to, or just want to retake it just in case, students can retake the SAT and ACT if needed. It's also the time for college applications. So a lot of college applications will ask for self-reported grades. But if a school reaches out that they want official scores, so making sure that students send those official scores to colleges that are requesting them during that time. And then in spring, that's when college acceptances will come out. And usually that's the time when colleges will ask for those official reports. So just making sure students are keeping track of that. Students are required to request those scores directly from the testing agency. The high school does not send them directly. So just keeping track of making sure you submit those scores and then scholarship opportunities as well. Okay. So then kind of going into the comparison between the SAT or ACT. Is one preferred over another? Not really. Both are usually taking consideration for college admissions. So again, it's just kind of taking a look at which test is going to play to the student's strengths. So as you'll kind of notice, the times are going to be a little bit different. SAT and ACT are going to cover different subjects. And so one is going to be digital, one's going to be on paper. So you'll kind of see the difference and we'll delve a little bit into each specific into the next slides. So for the SAT, it is scored between 200 to 800 and it's administered by College Board. It's offered multiple times in a year. And starting this past March, it actually went completely digital. So it's no longer offered on a paper format. So I know that's a really recent change. It has two sections. It has a reading and a math section, and you'll see it covers a lot more of math concepts. So it'll cover the algebra, the advanced math, the data analysis, geometry, and trigonometry. And it definitely has more complex wording and strategy on there. So the time for this one is going to be a little bit shorter than that ACT, approximately 2 hours and 24 minutes. And again, it's on a scale from 400 to 1600. And then here we have the information on some test dates that are coming up. So for our seniors that are still thinking about taking the SAT, there's a November and December test dates. And then for our juniors, there's test dates in March and May, so in that springtime. And then the registration deadlines are listed on there as well. And as we mentioned, we do offer the PSAT for our juniors. The deadline to register for that has already passed, but the test itself is upcoming on the 26th of this month. And for the PSAT, that also gives students the opportunity to qualify for the National Merit Scholarship Opportunity. So if students meet a certain score, they'll be considered for that scholarship opportunity, and they'll be notified in the fall of senior year if they've made semifinalist, and they'll be given information on how to pursue that opportunity. Okay. And then going into the ACT, so ACT does cover a few more different sections. So it has 5 parts. It has English, it has math. You'll notice that it does have some pre-calc and calc in there, but it's primarily algebra and geometry. It also has a science section, so it's primarily graph and table. So students that are really strong in either that science or math, this is a good test to kind of consider. And then it also has a reading section and an optional essay. There's very few campuses that require it, so just taking a look again for students that are have some colleges in mind, taking a look if that essay is required or not, if they're taking the ACT. And then in terms of time, it is a little bit longer, approximately 3 hours and 10 minutes for the test. And the score, or the scale on this one is from 1 to 36. And so again, we have some information of some upcoming test dates. Again, there'll be some fall ones and some spring ones on there. And for students that are interested in taking this test, there is a pre-ACT online option. So it's always good. I know we offer the PSAT as a practice for our students through our district, but it's a great way if students are thinking about the ACT if they want to go on and take that pre-SAT online for more information. And then I'll pass it over back to Ms. Cameron.
I'm back. Thank you, Vanessa. That was hopefully helpful for you all to know kind of what we're working with. There's a lot of differences in the SAT versus the ACT. Like Vanessa said, I don't think I've come across a college that says they will only take one or the other. They are widely accepted for many colleges. The SAT is really popular on the West Coast, which of course where we are, and the ACT is really popular more in the Midwest. So if you talk to friends maybe who live in different parts of the country, you might hear different preferences, but really it's just about how they market those tests. The one thing I didn't share earlier, I realized because there haven't been any questions yet, on the bottom of your page, if you do want to ask us questions while we're presenting, you can click on the Q&A feature and we will respond to your questions throughout the presentation. And then if we see multiple questions of the same type of question come through, we'll review that at the very end during our Q&A kind of read aloud time. So please use the Q&A feature if you have any questions. Okay, so we want to go into a little bit now that you know what the tests are, what we're working with, and maybe some of you are seniors and you're very well versed on what different college requirements are. But like Vanessa said, it's the number one is going through all the colleges you're interested in. And we recommend kind of organizing that in a spreadsheet. And even if you're a sophomore or junior right now in your research phase, just put all the colleges down that you've thought of, you've visited, you're interested in, and then create columns for things that are important to you. And the testing required would be a great column because you can keep track of, if you're on a website and it does say no test required, you would just put no in your column. Some of them may say optional, some may say recommended, some may say required. So, and like Vanessa said, you want to check back if you're not a senior, if you're a sophomore or a junior or a freshman even. It's changing for every year. It's a little different. So for now, the information we're sharing is up to date for the class of 2025. So the fall class of 2025 for first year students is what you'll see on the websites. But if you're in the class of 2026, things may shift a little bit. So we really want to remind you to double check the websites. But when you're looking at the languages that are shared, this is a quick summary of what it's saying to you. So test blind is, and this has kind of been replaced with test free, is basically like the UCs and Cal States. You can take the test, you can submit the scores, but they will not consider them in the admission process. So colleges all have different types of how they admit students. And many of them have a rubric on the back end of different priorities that they have. And then maybe there's points given. In these cases, there's 0 points given for any test scores, regardless of how great or not great the test is. Test optional, which is definitely the most confusing one for a lot of our students, is basically saying if you take a test and you submit your scores, great, they will be reviewed. If you don't submit your scores, great, they will not be reviewed and it won't harm you at all in the admission process. Different campuses have different details related to test optional, and often they will be pretty transparent about them on their website. So I recommend if you're looking at colleges that are test optional and you're on the fence and you don't know if you should submit scores or not, I actually have another slide about this and I'll go into it. But certainly check the website. If you have a college visit at your high school coming up and that campus is coming to your high school and the rep is there, ask them, say, what does it mean that you're test optional? Will I really not be penalized if I don't submit a test score? How does that compare to students that I'm competing against that do submit test scores? So the reps are more than willing to have that conversation with our students. There are other categories of test optional with exemptions. So they may say, we're a test optional campus unless you're applying to our nursing program, or unless you're applying to engineering, or unless you're applying early, or unless you're applying through some scholarship, maybe they'll need a test. So just be really careful on when you're looking at all the details that are required for that specific campus you're applying to. And then finally, the tests required. So ACT, SAT required, which is what Destiny will be talking about tonight. And that's pretty common, and it's what we used to work with all the time. It's part of the admissions process. So regardless of your score, you're submitting it. And in this test required category, there's a few subcategories. There's some colleges that will take a super score. So you can combine test dates and take your highest sitting in each category and combine them. Some will say your test overall best sitting total. So the best overall score from one date is what they require. So you just want to be familiar with what the campus requires for you. And other things that often come up, some of our students who are student athletes have asked, will the NCAA, if I'm trying to be a Division I or Division II or Division III athlete and apply through the athletics program, will I need to submit test scores? And the answer is no, not for the NCAA. So long ago, they had a sliding scale that was GPA and test scores, and that was part of the student's eligibility based on the division that they wanted to play in college. That's gone away. That went away in 2023. So students for that do want to do NCAA, it's just GPA and the core course requirements. But of course, it does say if you're applying to a college that does require SAT or ACT testing and you want to be a student athlete there, you'll still need to take the test, just not for NCAA. And then course placement and scholarships. This is becoming more and more important. A lot of colleges that maybe are test optional will say now, but you know what, if you do take your SAT or ACT, that will help you with placement once you are admitted and you attend our campus. We will be able to use that score to determine what English or math class you're starting in, which as many of our parents may know and remember, that's great if you can advance ahead from maybe a few classes once you get there that you don't have to take because you tested into higher classes. And then scholarships as well. A lot of our students are considered for merit scholarships, which is based off of just their application, just applying to the college. The college will determine if they qualify for certain merit scholarships, and this also varies by campus. But in some cases, in other scholarships, they're looking at SAT or ACT scores to determine eligibility and qualifying and consideration. So again, do your research based on the schools you're applying to. You can always talk to your high school counselor about your unique situation. If you have questions getting organized, we're happy to help you with that. And then it just gives you a resource that you can go back to, and especially as you're building your list and you know what you're working with by the time you're a senior and you're going to apply to college. And then, should I report test scores for the test optional campuses? So every college will kind of list on their website their average range of test scores for their admitted class the fall prior. And if your test score falls within that range of the average score, all the signs point to you have no reason not to submit it. It sounds like you're right in line with what they're looking for. If it exceeds it 100%, you should submit it. If you're significantly under their averages and your grades are still really good and you meet all the other areas, you may decide not to submit it. But also consider, are they super scoring? So look at the multiple, if you've taken multiple test dates, add up your scores to see if they will meet that average number if it's a super score campus. And Destiny will speak to that in a little bit as well. Colleges have shared time and time again that they do not look negatively upon students who do not send test scores. So some students may not be able to access the test. I know it's been hard to find testing centers, or maybe you're a competitive athlete and you're unable to, on all the dates that are offered, you're unable to be at those tests. It's okay to write that on the application. If in the additional information section, if the college is on the Common App, you can say, I did not take testing because I couldn't access the test. And obviously, if they're looking at all the other parts of your application. So you're just sharing kind of why, but you don't even have to do that if you don't want to. So that's if it's a test optional. And then how do I report my test scores? So like Vanessa said, that comes directly from College Board or ACT. You send your score reports directly to the college that you're applying to. And in some cases, they will say, we want to see all of your scores. In some cases, you can select your top scores to send. So again, it's all part of that research. But once you take an official SAT or ACT, your score is documented on your score report in that system. The PSAT that Vanessa talked about is a practice test. So that's not something you ever have to share with colleges. So of course, we always recommend kids take that PSAT without studying, especially I know our district offers it as a junior. A lot of people like to take it as a sophomore, which I think is great. And you can take that on your own. You can seek PSAT testing centers. There's also pre-ACT, the online program you can take pre-ACT tests. You can do online PSAT tests. And we recommend taking those without studying, just so that you have the raw score so you know where to build off of as you begin to study for the actual SAT or ACT. And with that, I'm excited to hand it over to Sarah.
All right, so some of our students qualify for accommodations due to a documented disability or other condition. It should go without saying that you should only seek accommodations if you have a disability or a condition that requires them. Typically, most students who get accommodations on the SAT and ACT are students with documented disabilities who also receive accommodations at school. So in order to request these accommodations, you'll need to work with your school SSD coordinator. And I've listed on this slide your SSD coordinator by site. IEPs, 504 plans, and doctor's notes are usually not sufficient by themselves. So each request must be supported by documentation, including appropriate academic and diagnostic test scores. And your SSD coordinator at your site will help you and support this. Accommodations requested should be similar to the accommodations you currently receive in school, and accommodations must be approved before testing. A request alone is not enough. And each site in our district has different procedures for requesting accommodations. So your first step in this process is to reach out directly to your site SSD coordinator. Make sure if you are interested in receiving accommodations that you begin the process early. The approval process can take up to 7 weeks and only begins once all of your documentation has been received. If some of your documentation is missing and/or you have to resubmit information, the 7-week process will begin all over again. Since preparing documentation and getting all of your information will take some time, make sure you are beginning with plenty of time to spare, at least 3 months before your desired test date to be safe. It's better to make sure your accommodations are granted first before selecting that test date. And we have an awesome resource available, and it's called FairTest. And this interactive database through FairTest lists bachelor degree granting institutions that do not require all or most recent U.S. high school graduates applying for fall 2025 to submit ACT and/or SAT results before admission decisions are made. As the restrictions column indicates, some schools only accept applicants who meet minimum grade or class rank criteria. Others use ACT, SAT scores solely for course placement. And this is really important that, again, we are stating this, please check with individual schools for details. For example, Stanford is currently listed as test optional on FairTest, but it will resume standardized test requirements for undergraduate admissions for students applying in 2025. Again, this website is used as a reference tool to further your research, but it is a great starting point to look into test optional and test free campuses.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So what Sarah just shared was for students who have IEPs or 504s. So if your student does not have a formalized IEP or 504 plan in high school, often you will not be thinking about accommodations. But some of our students who, like Sarah said, receive accommodations in high school can apply through College Board and ACT to receive those same accommodations on the test. And as Sarah said, there has to show that there's been a history of those accommodations. To like have the accommodation for a few weeks before it's submitted usually doesn't work for the approval process. They need to see some demonstrated need. So the SSD coordinator is the right person to contact, or your high school counselor if you have any questions about that. We are showing just a list. This is just for fun. It is not an exhaustive list, and it will probably change next year. But because so many of our kids apply to a handful of colleges that we're familiar with, we just thought we'd share which ones, as of this year, are test optional and test required to give you a jump start. Maybe you're a sophomore, maybe you're a junior, and you haven't gotten into this yet. You can kind of see where you stand. So as we talked about, the UCs and the Cal States do not accept tests. So that's a big chunk of a lot of the colleges our students apply to. Many kids may apply to LMU or in California, Chapman, Colorado State, Fort Collins, TCU, SMU, Columbia, and Princeton are still showing as test optional. University of Colorado Boulder, Arizona State, University of Arizona. These are all test optional campuses. So as we talked about earlier, you can take the test and you can submit your score. You can also opt to not take the test and show how amazing you are in other areas, and your application is still complete. Tests required, and some of these are new, Caltech and Harvard, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, who we're about to hear from next, Stanford, Florida State, University of Florida, Georgia State, and University of Georgia, Purdue University, UT Austin, Georgia Tech. Those are just to name a few. One thing I will say earlier when Vanessa was talking about the ACT with writing, it's really rare to see a college require the writing portion. SAT has done away with that, and ACT still has the option. And last time I checked, there's only 3 or 4 campuses nationwide that actually require the writing. Some may require it for certain scholarships, like we talked about our placement, but in general, more cases than not, it's the ACT without the writing that's required, but students can certainly take the writing if they're willing to do that. And with that, I'm so excited to introduce Destiny. So thank you, Destiny, again for being here and sharing your knowledge with us.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all so much for joining. My name is Destiny Martinez. I'll kind of go into my title a little bit later as I'm talking about specifically the University of Tennessee. But because the University of Tennessee Knoxville is a test required school, I was asked by your counseling team to kind of shed some light on what it means to have a test required process, or at least admissions process. Similar to what your counselors have mentioned, there really is no preference for one test over the other. I can say that, like, working at UT, the state of Tennessee is an ACT state. So typically when we're sharing out data or when we have our transparency page and our blog posts, it is going to be an ACT score that you will see. Usually that doesn't mean that we're just accepting the ACT. We will also accept the SAT. So whichever one you feel comfortable with. Obviously, both will have different methodologies, so kind of keep that in mind. And when it comes to test required, or at least the test scores, it's not going to be the only factor in your application. So usually when it comes to test required admissions practices, most likely and most often, a good question to ask is we're reviewing applications on a holistic basis. So we are taking a look at everything that you're including in your application, whether that be test scores, your personal statement, any sort of, classes that you've taken, the curriculum, the rigor of your coursework. We're taking a look at everything that you're including in your application, and it's not just going to be your test scores, even if we are a test required school. Now, I can say that sometimes if you're applying to a competitive program, and I'll talk about that later on in some of my other slides, but if you're participating or wanting to apply to a specific program, sometimes there may be a specific minimum that you need to have for competitive programs. So just kind of keep that in mind. Please be sure to ask admissions representatives if they're visiting your school, get in contact with your counselors to see what sort of competitive programs that university may have. And then, like mentioned, test required schools oftentimes have varying degrees of what scores they are going to accept. So the University of Tennessee, we do super score your scores. So that means if you've taken the test, either the SAT or the ACT multiple times, we'll take the best score from each component, and that'll go towards your admissions and maybe even your merit-based scholarships. Some schools are just a single score. So whatever you do, just make sure that you keep asking those questions. What sort of scores are they going to be taking? And like your counselors have mentioned before, that essay portion is oftentimes going to be optional. Usually we're not going to be looking at that essay portion, but some schools may have that as a requirement. And then in terms of your scholarships, sometimes scores may result in merit-based scholarships. This is often another question that you may need to ask for the University of Tennessee. It does, but not all test-required schools are going to award merit-based scholarships just based on your scores. It may be your GPA, it may be something else, it may be another application that you might need to submit. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're applying to test-required schools. It's not a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately. So just please be sure to ask, certain questions and different things like that. All right, next slide. Okay, now comes the fun part. Just kidding. But for those who are interested in the University of Tennessee, my name is Destiny Martinez. As mentioned before, I am the regional admissions representative that is based in Southern California. I'm based in Pomona, California. So I'm super excited to be working with you all. I do read your applications. So those that are coming from this specific district and other districts in the area, I will be kind of your go-to person as it relates to the University of Tennessee. So in terms of our different programs, in the next slide, you can see all of the academic colleges that we have. We have 12 undergrad academic colleges, over 530 graduate and professional academic programs, and you can see all of those colleges listed here. The ones that do have the asterisks, just kind of keep in mind that those are going to be our academically competitive colleges. So as I mentioned before, when it comes to test required admissions processes, sometimes there are certain minimums or certain minimal scores that students need to have. For example, for us, the Tickle College of Engineering, there's a certain math score that students need to have in order to be considered for that specific college. While the university itself doesn't have a specific minimum in terms of GPA and in terms of test score, the Tickle College of Engineering does, the College of Architecture, and you can see those ones that are going to be listed there. So just kind of keep in mind another question to ask your admissions counselors. Next slide. And then in terms of our application process, we do have our own application and we are also on the Common App. In the Common App, there is a section where you can include your test scores if you are choosing to report them. In terms of the admissions process, we do accept self-reported scores. So you don't need to wait for the College Board or ACT to send your verified score reports to us. As long as you self-report them, that's totally fine. We will accept that. You can see our required materials there, as well as our optional items. So usually I would also suggest when it says optional items, I know recommendations and supporting statements, sometimes that's just an additional thing that students may need to do. But if you do have that ability to get a recommendation letter or to write a supporting statement, please be sure that you kind of take advantage of that. Oftentimes that kind of gives me a better picture of who the student is if I'm able to see a recommendation letter from their counselor, from a teacher, from a mentor. So very exciting stuff in terms of our application process. And as I mentioned, for test required schools, depending on the school, obviously merit-based scholarships may range. Sometimes you will receive a merit-based scholarship, sometimes you won't. For us, all students are going to be automatically awarded a merit-based scholarship depending on their GPA and their test score, which you can see that criteria. If you scan the QR code or if you go to that specific website, you can see what GPA do I need, what test score do I need, and then you'll be able to see the merit-based scholarship that you're able to be awarded. I would say that for admitted students, at least at the University of Tennessee, if you're admitted either early action or if you're admitted in our regular decision pool, you have up until July 1st to submit new test scores. So another opportunity for you to take multiple tests for us to super score. So for my seniors this year, you have up until, if you're admitted, you have up until July 1st, 2025 to submit new scores. So that way you can boost up your merit-based scholarship award package, which is super nice. As I mentioned, I am going to be the regional admissions representative that's will be your go-to person. So if anyone has any specific questions on the University of Tennessee, I'm more than happy to answer those either here or in another format. I know that your counselors will be sharing our contact information, so I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can if you have any questions.
Thank you, Destiny. Yes, and please let us know if you have any questions. We haven't had any yet, which is, we must be very thorough tonight. So hopefully that's the case. But while we have Destiny, feel free to ask any questions that relate to University of Tennessee, Knoxville, even if it isn't about testing. She's happy to answer those. So we have resources to share with you. And as we talked about earlier, these will be posted on the College and Career website. So if you want to revisit this conversation, everything will be clickable on the presentation slide, so you can access the direct links. But we do have a college testing FAQ on our district website that we update every year that kind of gives the very basic foundation information of how to navigate the testing season for you. We also have the direct link to the ACT website to register for the ACT test. And there's also a lot of information on that website related to even career planning, to the pre-ACT option that I told you about. There's a lot of conversation about shifting from the ACT to the digital format, like SAT has done this year. So if you want to read about that, it's all on the ACT website. And College Board, of course, is the SAT website. So College Board hosts the SAT, the PSAT, and AP tests. So many of our students may already have a College Board account because they've taken AP tests. If you haven't, then you just have to create an account in both places, and then you'll start getting emails and information as well about the tests. As Sarah mentioned, FAIR test. I think this is like such a diamond in the rough. We love FAIR test because it does give you that ability to breathe and rest easy on maybe I don't need to take a test if this isn't right for you. And so like we showed you, there's that list of, it's a very interactive list. You can search on the colleges you're interested in and if they require testing or not. And they even have the updated one on which some of them didn't used to require and now they do because we're seeing the shift go kind of back that direction for some campuses. And then we also linked all of our high school counseling websites. The information we share tonight and on all of these webinars is intended to be really general, bird's eye view, big picture, because our high school counselors are sharing this information during their grade level presentations to students. They also do parent nights. They also have information linked on their website. So I want to make sure you have access to that those direct websites. Junior year is often the time where counselors will talk a lot about testing on the 11th grade lesson. So they'll talk about kind of everything we talked about today, but they'll be able to tell the students exactly a little bit stronger of a timeline, maybe some resources that they offer at their schools to prepare. And so with the conversation of resources, a lot of our students, you may hear, or maybe you do on your own, do participate in test prep. And that is completely an individual decision. There's a lot of companies in our community that do offer test prep. A lot of them are great, a lot of them, but you have to use your own opinion. You do have to pay for them. And there's a lot of ways to study without paying for these tests. So if a student is really motivated and wants to do the best that they can in these tests, and they are not interested in paying for test prep, I really advise that they talk to their counselor. There's so many free resources and opportunities that we can help the student find for free to be prepared for the SAT or the ACT. If you on your own choose to go look at different test prep companies in the community, it's totally up to you based on what your interest and focus area is. We can't recommend one over the other, but there's some that are online based. There's some that are in person. There's a combination. Some of the test prep that College Board or ACT offers are also online based that students can access on their own. And I think it's important to also mention that students often, even if they don't know if they're taking the SAT or the ACT, if they are planning ahead and they are able to take the PSAT as a sophomore on their own time and then do the pre-ACT on their own. And then there's a score comparison. You can Google SAT, ACT comparisons, score chart and see what score is stronger. And that might lean toward what test is a better fit for that student. And then from that point on, you just move forward with that test. So students that are going back and forth, which isn't very common, but if you're constantly going back and forth with test prep and all that studying and putting a lot of energy into it, then it often can take away from your grades and your classes and your activities and all the other things that you want to show colleges of what make you such a great applicant. So really focus on the balance and trying to allow yourself the journey you want for yourself and your plans, but not to impede the other areas of your education that are also equally important. So with that, we're going to have some live Q&A, and I see a few questions in here. But while we're looking at that, this is our contact information. We wanted to make sure you were aware of who we are, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to email us. But like I said, you can also certainly talk to your high school counselor because they can provide a little bit more individual information. So one of the questions that came up, we can look at, would you be able to share the advantages or disadvantages of taking the SAT multiple times? So Vanessa or Sarah or Destiny, feel free to take off or turn on your camera if you'd like to participate. I think from my perspective, if a student is taking the SAT or ACT twice, right, that shows, okay, they took it and they think they can do better. That's completely common and normal. Even 3 times, as long as the score is shifting a little bit and showing growth, that the student's taking the feedback of the original score and maybe doing some prep on their own to improve the areas that weren't as strong. And then colleges would see that growth, and that's completely understandable. If a student is taking a test quite a few times and the score is not getting better or it's going down, then it doesn't serve that student well to continue to take more tests. Like I said, it's just kind of taking away from the other things that they could be using on their college application that show what a great student they are. So that would be my overall opinion. Let's see here. Are any of the schools in our district offering the pre-ACT? No, not to my knowledge. The reason we do the PSAT junior year district-wide and we offer them for students to pay your individual high school is because of that national merit. So students can qualify as a national merit finalist by taking the PSAT in their junior year. That's the only time they'll be considered for the national merit finalist. And that just allows a student, if they do get to that point, which is very exceptional, then putting that on a college application is obviously it's very favored. So we want to make sure the kids have the opportunity for that. But we, to my knowledge, do not offer a pre-ACT, but there's a lot of opportunity if you go to the ACT.org to look that up. Also, I know some test prep companies on their own will offer like a pre-ACT that they could offer for students to take through their program. Let's see here. Let me see if there's any that were answered. It looks like, Destiny, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit deeper into the minimums or the requirements for some of those more competitive majors that you offer. I know engineering and architecture are often really popular.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned in the specific answer, there are sometimes certain colleges and universities that will have established minimums. So I did mention that our Technical College of Engineering, if you go to our website, there is an established minimum specifically for the math subscore. For architecture and design, while there is no minimum that's listed on our website, it is considered an academically competitive college. So therefore, usually test scores are going to be kind of towards the higher end of our middle 50%. So I listed our middle 50% in terms of our students that were admitted for fall 2023. And so usually that's the goal, or that's kind of the like not expectation, but definitely a goal for students to kind of aim for. So in terms of our middle 50% for the ACT, it was a 25 to a 31. And then for the SAT, it was an 1190 to a 1340. So again, middle 50%, not specific minimums unless it relates to a specifically academically competitive college. That's where, those specific minimums are going to kind of come into place. Is going to be those usually like heftier, more accelerated colleges and programs. So,
and
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I did want to address the one if a student has very good grades with a heavy course load and lots of AP classes, but did bad on their test. This is a question that we typically get a lot, or I typically get a lot, especially being a test required school. That's why we have, so back to our checklist, sometimes colleges and universities will offer a supporting statement that is optional. Usually it asks something along the lines of, if you feel like anything is missing from your application, what do you want to share with the admissions committee? For us, it's talking about any sort of certain, disparities or certain challenges that students have experienced. Usually that is where I say individuals should write about any sort of challenges that they have, whether it's in relation to their test scores or in relation to anything else. The personal statement, keep in mind that it's going to be sent to all Common App schools if you're applying on the Common App. So sometimes if you're talking about test scores or you're talking about different things like that, while you can address that, that also may be sent to test optional schools, and they might be wondering, like, what are you talking about? So I would recommend that utilize the supporting statement if you have that option in the college admissions application to talk about any sort of challenges that students have experienced. Save the personal statement for the actual personal statement. At least with Common App, it's 650 words. The UC PIQs are a little bit different, but they're also test optional. So just kind of keep that in mind. Definitely ask questions, ask admissions representatives how that wants to be portrayed or how you should be portraying that. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add anything. Yeah.
I mean, I'll always add something to this conversation. Yes, I completely agree with, I know on the high school side, so it's great we have that both sides of the desk. From the high school side, we always tell students that colleges are not looking to like for a gotcha, like, oh my gosh, well, your test scores, like that's not going to get you in. And depending on the selectivity of the college, maybe that ends up being the case. But if they know in the forefront, you're a high school student, and if you have a rationale that is real and genuine of why you either couldn't access a test. I mean, if it's a test required, you do have to submit test scores. But if the test score wasn't strong, if you were driving really far to your test and by yourself and it was pouring rain and you just were freaked out. I mean, you can share as much information as you'd like on so that the human being, the reader like Destiny, who's reviewing the application, has the context to understand. And maybe it was one really poor test score, and then you went back and you retook it and your scores went up quite a bit. That's telling itself. And you could even say, as you may notice, my first SAT was a disaster. I did not do well. I did not play well in my sports game the night before, and I just was off. And I learned a lot about myself and my blank. And then I went and took another test, and I feel much better about the second score you see. So you can use the application to communicate with the reps in ways like Destiny shared. That additional information is kind of the catch-all, and it doesn't have to be the most well-crafted, creative writing experience. It's just like hey, I just want you to know this. Whereas the actual Common App essay, the 650-word one, is the one that will go to every Common App campus you apply to. So you want to be sure that the words you're choosing in there apply to all the colleges that you're sending it to. And then, like Destiny said, the UC PIQ, they don't have anywhere on the UC or Cal State application to report test scores. I do know of some students who put it in the additional information on the UC test. Totally a choice that a student, I mean, they can do whatever they'd like, but I don't believe that the UCs will even like review that part for the admission piece. But the PIQs, they have 4 questions that students have to answer, and they all are 350 words or less. And the PIQs, it's really important to respond to the question that they're asking. And that's the biggest advice the UCs share. And they want you to talk about yourself. So a lot of students will get really excited to share a story about their grandparent or their best friend or the small child they met at camp that they helped because they were running a sports camp, and that you really want to keep it about yourself. So went on a tangent there for the writing. Okay, it looks like we are all done with the questions that you all had. Vanessa or Sarah, is there anything else you want to add before we end our webinar tonight? Or Destiny?
I think for our families who have students receiving special education services, it is great to start reaching out to those SSD coordinators and start looking over your IEPs for accommodations so you are ready to get those. And you can also get accommodations for the PSAT as well. So if you are going to be taking that, you also need to apply through College Board through your SSD for the PSAT as well.
Yeah, and again, like Jamie mentioned, like if there's any questions that come up, always feel free to reach out to your counselor. They're always more than happy to help answer any SAT questions or connect you all with resources as well.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. Destiny, we really appreciate it. Vanessa, thank you for your perspective on the high school counselor side. Sarah, thank you for your expertise. A special thank you to Edwin, who's behind the scenes helping us with our Zoom technology. And again, we hope to see many of you back this Thursday for the Thriving in Transition webinar. And then following that, we have a career programs and community college webinar, October 22nd. And then finally, the financial aid webinar, December 4th. So the FAFSA comes out December 1st. We thought we'd give it a few days to make sure it really came out, then do a whole thing on how to complete the FAFSA and all the details. So we hope you've marked your calendar for those dates. And again, if you have any questions, please email your counselor and they are happy to help. Thank you all and have a great night. Bye-bye.